Loop Hero is a game about experimentation, balance, and perseverance. When I first started experimenting in the game, my first big discovery was that I was confused and bored. But I persevered, and what I later discovered was something else entirely. Stay tuned to find out more. Welcome back to A Nomad in Gameland. Today we're continuing our Free on Epic Games series, where we test out the free games thrown out by Epic Games every week to see if they're actually worth playing. Or if you miss your chance to get it for free, we're going to discuss whether it's worth buying. As a disclaimer, we're not affiliated with Epic Games or the makers of any game, and all of our reviews are completely independent. Today we're looking at Loop Hero, which you can pick up from Epic Games for free until the 10th of August 2023. In a funny coincidence, it's actually on sale at the moment on Steam, coming in at £4.22, though it has a regular price of £12.79. On Epic it normally goes for £12.49, and the cheapest CD key I could find was for £4.16. Now this is another game that I had never heard of. When doing a little research, I saw it being described as a roguelike game. I've actually got no idea what that means, but if it means something to you, and you think it's correct to describe Loop Hero as a roguelike game, please let me know in the comment section below. Now I hope roguelike is the word to call it, because this game is actually quite hard to describe, other than difficult. It might be easier for me just to describe to you what the gameplay is like. If you want to skip this basic introduction, you can use the timestamps below. As the name suggests, our hero starts each expedition on a randomly generated loop. The movement and combat are both automatic. You don't get any direct control over either, other than to pause or to retreat. The hero will keep going around and around the loop until you decide it's time to leave, or until you die. Every time you pass go, you collect £200. And by go, I mean the campfire. And by £200, I mean a little HP. You can leave the loop at any time, but ideally you'd wait until you're on the campfire. If you leave outside of the campfire, you'll lose 40% of all the materials you collected on the loop. Even worse, if you leave during a battle, or an enemy forces you to leave by killing you, you'll lose a staggering 70% of all your materials. There's also a meter telling you how long is left in the day, and a ticker for how many laps of the loop you've done. The higher the loop number, the stronger the enemies are. At the beginning of each loop, you'll only encounter green slimes. These are the most basic enemy. To change that, you'll have to use the only part of the loop you have direct control over, your cards. So when you come out of the main loop, you have access to a deck of cards. This deck will determine what cards you'll have access to during each loop. There are quite a few different types, but here's a quick summary. First, you have landscape cards such as mountains, meadows, and forests. These might give you a passive buff, but they may also give you resources when placed. For example, mountains increase your base HP, but they also give you a pebble, and 10 pebbles adds up to a piece of rock. Secondly, you have what I call monster generators, which pumps out a certain amount of monsters every number of days. And lastly, you have what I call utility cards, like a road lantern that reduces the amount of enemies gathering on certain tiles, or an outpost where station soldiers will come out and help you. Optimizing these cards in your deck is crucial for a successful loop. Now back to the loop itself. When you kill an enemy, there's a chance they'll drop certain cards in loot, but you'll need to spawn stronger enemy types to get better loot. And you'll constantly need better loot, because after every loop, the enemies get stronger. Herein lies the balance between risk and reward. Play too cautiously and you won't get the loot you need to keep up with the strengthening enemies. But play too aggressively and you'll find yourself being overwhelmed even with the best items. And remember, if you die, 70% of your stuff, gone. Now if you can keep this balancing act up for long enough, you'll eventually place enough cards which triggers a boss fight. Beat them and you'll unlock the next chapter. Now that's basically the loop. There's a little bit to do outside of the loop as well. If you gather enough materials, you'll be able to build and upgrade buildings. These unlock things like other cards, extra help on the loop, and even the other two playable classes. When you start the game, you only have access to the warrior class. You actually have to build buildings to unlock the rogue and the necromancer. So that's the game in a nutshell. What's it actually like to play? I want to start with the criticisms I had early on in the game. I mean, this game is tough, and the game starts with a simple premise, but then drops you into a sea of numbers and information. What's vampirism? How do I even pronounce it? How do I collect this green stuff so I can build this building? Nothing is explained well. That is until you unlock the Intel Center. In fact, I didn't even know you could upgrade buildings until chapter 3. I actually found myself consulting with an online wiki. I think if anyone has to look at a wiki on the first level of any game, then I don't think the game is explaining itself well enough. Once I did learn how to collect that green stuff, it led me to the next problem I had with the early game. Do I look like a bloody farmer to you? That's a trick question, but the sentiment was real. And of course I mean no disrespect to actual farmers, but I hate farming in games. It can make otherwise solid gameplay feel like a chore. Games shouldn't feel like work. I don't think this is a particularly controversial opinion to have, but at the beginning of Loop Hero, that's precisely how it felt to me. It felt like work. You see, once you start to get a feel of the mechanics of the game, you think that you'll need to upgrade certain buildings in order to beat a boss. That is if you're not already amazing at the game. But without buildings, you're not just locked out of progression from the game, you're even prevented from using the rogue or necromancer. Can you get the required materials for these buildings organically? In time, yeah, sure. But if those materials don't align with the cards you plan to use for your particular strategy, then I'm afraid it might actually take a while. Or compromise the success of your loop. In my playthrough, I felt like I had to play several loops without any intention of beating the boss. It was purely to gather materials to upgrade my buildings. And I was really bored. And you have to deal with the risk that if you die you'll lose 70% of what you farmed. So not only was I bored, I was angry a lot of the time because I did die. But let's be fair, there's an element of risk and reward to everything in life, and that includes games. And learning how far to push on a loop is a form of progress. Unlocking buildings is a form of progress. And if you grit your teeth and do some farming early on, it really will help you progress in the game. But what I then discovered was that I was completely wrong on everything I just said. You don't need to farm. You do need to unlock a handful of buildings. But my initial frustration stemmed from me sucking at the game, and not the way the game was designed. As I improved, my level of anger diminished, because not only does gathering materials become easier, you realise you don't really need to gather too many of them in the first place. Because you can, and I did, beat the game without unlocking all of the buildings and their upgrades. The developers also tried to include ways to stop you from farming. In earlier chapters, the amount of materials you can extract per loop is capped. For example, in chapter 1 you're limited to 10 of each material. I can respect this level design. Again, it forces you to assess the risk and reward of pushing too hard or too little on a loop, and ultimately makes you improve at the game. Now you can farm for materials in this game, and you will get a bunch of buffs for doing so, and I'm sure plenty of people will find this process enjoyable and rewarding. But you don't have to, and I didn't, because I would hate that. And let's leave it at that. So how do I feel about the game now? Where Loop Hero excels is the level of depth and options you can use to strategize. Although overwhelming at first, you later get lost in the numbers, and I found myself thinking about ways I could beat each chapter even when I stepped away from the game. The fact there are 3 classes basically means there's 3 games, because there's 3 different strategies you need to develop for each chapter. This is of course because each class has their own strengths and weaknesses. I remember finding myself thinking, should I rely on summoning skeletons? It would probably help me to handle bigger fights. Or should I use a rogue to hit hard and fast with a high crit rate? Or should I use a warrior, the first class I learned how to use? And what cards do I need? Forest will increase my attack speed, and rocks will increase my HP. Will I need meadows on this one? There are so many ways to play this game, and figuring out how to make a strategy work is where this game shines. There is also the hidden feature of synergies. This is actually one of the things that annoyed me earlier in my playthrough, but combining the placement of cards in a certain way can lead to increased rewards, as well as increased threats. None of this is explained to you. You'll find them out by accident, or in my case, some by accident and some through the wiki. And the payoff for all these considerations and strategies is beating the boss, but that's where the game ends. For me, I just don't think Loop Hero has that much replayability. You finish the chapters and then you uninstall. But for others, I can understand how the loop can be relaxing in and of itself. You know, you're slowly building up strength and momentum, and if you know what you're doing, and with everything being automated, I can definitely see the appeal of Loop Hero as a very chill game where you can just turn your brain off for a bit. I enjoyed my 16 hours with the game, and I tell you, it did not feel like 16 hours. In fact, when I finished this script, I was still stuck on chapter 4. But the addictive nature of Loop Hero is what led me to complete it before posting the video. If you can grab it for free, I'd definitely recommend trying it out. The story in Loop Hero is the same old thing. The universe is about to be destroyed, you're trying to stop it, you don't remember anything, but clearly you're the chosen one. The first thing you need to do in the game is kill the Lich. This is like a Skeletor type person who's wearing a really cool coat. Now there are 4 chapters, each with their own boss, and I don't want to spoil anything for you. While the story can be interesting, and it's one of the reasons why I kept playing to the end, I just felt it ended a little flat. It's not terrible in any way, but just not exceptional. Loop Hero is not a demanding game, and can probably be played on any potato. And while I think the novelty and charm of 8-bit graphics is starting to wear thin, the cutscenes and dialogue here both look good. The battle animations and sprites look pretty impressive too, and I think this is one of the main reasons why combat is so addictive. I was actually really impressed by the graphical design on the loop. You can see what's on every tile, and there's so much information that's being conveyed. It's actually quite impressive that you can tell what's going on. I think they designed it really well. It might seem like a mess at first, but you'll learn how to read what's there soon enough. I think we've already learned the lesson from other indie games, but Loop Hero is another example showing that you don't need fancy graphics to make a decent looking game, or an information dense one either. After a frustrating start, Loop Hero develops into an addictive game that will get you thinking about it in the shower, on your way to work, and while you're trying to sleep. And with its automated battles and endless enemies, it will take a toll on your eyes, which will be glued to the screen throughout. But it relies heavily on the difficulty and the gameplay of the loop to keep you playing. With a tame and simple story, when it's over, I just don't think there's enough motivation to keep going or to replay. Unless other than to figure out another way to beat the game. One way is fine for me though, thank you very much. So should you get Loop Hero? Well, as always, if you can get it for free this week, of course you should. You literally have nothing to lose. But not only should you get it, I also think it's worth you playing. But only if you're willing to sink in a fair chunk of time and commitment. Loop Hero is not a casual type of game. If you miss it for free, should you pay the £4 or so for it? Personally, it's not really the type of game I go for, so I wouldn't. But if you're a fan of the genre, then why not? £4.16 is about fair price for this. But that's for the CD key. I would not recommend paying maybe over £5 to £10 for Loop Hero, just because I think the replayability is so low. I'm adding Loop Hero as an actual saving on our table of savings, so congratulations to Loop Hero. Just a quick explanation, free games that are worth playing are considered actual savings, and games that aren't worth playing are considered technical savings. So that brings our actual savings for August 23 up to £11.75, which is pretty nice. And that's all from me. I'd love to hear what you have to think about Loop Hero, so please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. If you liked the video, please give it a like. If you didn't, by all means give it a thumbs down. If you'd like to watch more reviews like this, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.